Hey, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. Good morning, good afternoon, and welcome to Good Thinking. Good thinkers from all over the world, let us know who you are and where you're from. We'll try to get to a lot of your comments, and if I don't get to them during the live show, which I'm going to try my hardest, then we will get to them after. And if you're here live, let's get started. All right, today's topic is on argumentation or arguing. So the first question as people are coming on the show is, in addition to who are you and where you're from, do you like to argue? Do you like to argue? Yes or no? And while you're thinking about this, I'm going to say hi to some people. I'm going to say hi. Welcome, Bethany. Good thinker for sure. Glad you got to slip away from disturbing your husband with all of our good thinking. Welcome, Jose and Melissa and Raj and Lee and Azay. Well, here we've got Sakshi. I hope I'm pronouncing everyone's names right. I'm really bad. And the names are coming through very fast, so I can't say hi to everyone, but I want to say hi to a lot of you and welcome you. So I'm just going to bring bring you on the screen, be part of the show. And as you good thinkers know, we try to have a lot of participation from everyone, and let us know where you're from, because when it comes to arguing, there are a lot of cultural differences in how people think about arguments. I mean, it's not just determined, I shouldn't say that, it's not just determined by where you come from, but also, what your family is like and your personality and the situation at the moment, like right now. So as you're coming on, I'm going to say hi to some more people. Dominique and Kathy, and let's say Azay, I've said hi. Clinical mental health counselor. Okay, excellent. Let's say Gilbert from West Africa, Stephen from this great state of Oregon. All right, so we've got a lot of good thinkers. I'm going to take this banner off the end so we can definitely have more comments flow through. Anyway, all right, let's get started. Let me know who you are and where you're from, but also let's tell me what you think of arguing. When you think of arguing, do you get a good feeling or do you get a bad feeling? Do you think arguing is mostly good or mostly bad? What do you think? All right. So Raj says, I don't like arguments. All right. We have one doesn't like arguments. And we've got Melissa because Melissa says she's from Northern Illinois, but her heritage is Cuban, and she grew up arguing. I also grew up arguing, although some people in my family really loved arguing, me, and some people in my family rather disliked arguing. So I think there are cultural issues, there are family things, there are individual preferences, and then there's also just the moment in time. All right, so here's the scenario one. And LinkedIn, this LinkedIn user, bad for the most part, but someone else says it depends on who it is, and it definitely depends on the situation. Trivia arguments, someone avoids arguments. We cannot win an argument. Mohammed, we cannot win an argument. Okay, I'm going to try to change your mind and about how to think about arguments. All right. So I'm going to give you a scenario, and then I want you to imagine this scenario in your mind. Imagine in your mind. Where else are you going to imagine it? Imagine the scenario, and then let me know what you think. Okay, so you're in a conversation with a friend or a colleague. Now, you might be in a one-to-one conversation, or maybe you scroll through social media. So whatever you want to come up with in your mind is fine. And you hear or read a claim or argument that you disagree with. So you listen or read how they support their claim, and you're just not convinced. You're like, I don't agree with that. And I'm not talking about someone's opinion, but something strong where they say, this is really what is true. For example, companies should not have their interns work for free. All right. So let's say that you think that's not true. And they provide a bunch of arguments to support their a bunch of evidence rather to support their argument, but you're still not convinced. All right. You think to yourself, I don't agree with that. So how do you feel? So get that feeling in your body. Scenario 2. Now imagine the same scenario, but this conversation or thread is clearly with someone with whom you agree on this topic. All right. Now we'll find no shortage of statements about what's true and what we should believe. You can scroll through social media. Don't say this, don't think that, don't say this. Fine. But as you know, on Good Thinking, this is our time to move a little bit away from all the time we are told what to think so that we can improve how to think. So this is our fun thought experiment. And we do a lot of fun thought experiments. All right. How do you feel about the scenario 1 where you really disagree with the argument, the evidence that they provide, it's not convincing you? And how do you feel in scenario 2? I mean, not what you think, but how do you feel? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it frustrated? All right. Now, can you evaluate the quality of the argument separate from whether or not you agree with the argument? Can you evaluate the quality of the evidence separate from whether you agree with the argument? So for example, if you hear the argument that interns should not have to be paid with cash, companies should be able to employ interns and not pay them with cash, you may disagree with that, but can you evaluate the evidence that they use to support their argument separate from whether you agree with the overall argument? And number 2, can you evaluate the argument separate from the person who is making the argument? So if it's a person that's a noteworthy person or someone that you dislike or disagree with in general, or some politician that you think is horrible, can you evaluate their argument separate from that person? That means that you are moving away from that first logical fallacy, which is the ad hominem fallacy, where we see someone we don't like, or see someone we disagree with, or hear someone from someone that we don't like. And because we don't like them, we dismiss their arguments. We don't separate their ideas from the person. All right. So here's what we're going to do today. You're going to get a little challenge. Because if you want to be able to answer that you can evaluate arguments separate from the person, or if you want to be able to know what's a strong argument, what's a valid argument, or what's a persuasive argument, different, then you should mark your calendars. We're going to do a little bit of that today and prepare in preparation for our new LinkedIn learning course coming out this week. I don't know if it's coming out the 15th or 16th, which is Critical Thinking for More Effective Communication. So this one is going to hit you right in the changing your mind about arguments sweet spot. All right. So could you make the argument for something you disagree with? What if you were offered $1 million? Someone offered you the equivalent of $1 million to make a good, strong case in favor of a claim that you strongly disagree with. But you have to make a good, strong case. Could you make a good, strong case for something you disagree with, a claim you disagree with, for $1 million? Ha ha ha, let me know. Sorry, I'm missing some of you. I'm going to say some of the comments. Yes, you can do that. It's hard enough for both questions. We've got Armin. When I couldn't separate it, that would be my problem. Michael, regular good thinker. It would be nice to be totally objective. We are only human, though. Absolutely. It's very difficult to be objective. But if we were in the mode of looking at arguments as something elegant, if we were in the mode of looking at arguments with the goal of getting closer to the truth, not with the goal of proving what we believe is right to be right, but the goal of getting closer to the truth, where we're trying to enrich understanding, whether it was comfortable or not, knowing that landing on the truth never really happens. I mean, we're constantly, unless you are done with progress, then you could start to see the value in arguments. Okay, so I'm going to bring in some of your comments because it's going fast. If it's not aligned with my values, maybe not. Okay, so do facts have to align with your values? What happens when we start getting more and more data being kind of analyzed by quantum physics machines, machines that are quantum computers, and they can analyze all this data, and all of a sudden some information comes out that is beyond our human comprehension, and it comes out and it's an inconvenient truth. Do you ignore it because it doesn't jibe with your values? Maybe. All right, so we're going to bring some more comments in. Let's see. It would be hard. I would try. I would think my biggest roadblock, I wouldn't want to see evidence that would change my mind on something I felt passionately about. It's hard to challenge your own beliefs. Okay, that's honest. And for your honesty and for all of your participation, I'm going to give all the participants so far rubber chickens, as you know, but that doesn't mean that if I didn't pull your comments in that I'm not going to see them later. So definitely want to make sure everyone who participates gets rubber chickens. It's basic research. You can start with a hypothesis, but you have to let the facts either prove or disprove it. Melissa says, yes, a very wise professor of mine taught me to read at least 2 opinions from one side and 2 opinions from the other to develop an objective opinion. Excellent. Excellent, excellent, excellent. And we'll talk about the role in just a minute of opinions with arguments. And there are different things like what constitutes a strong argument, what constitutes a valid argument, and what, and those are actually different because you can have a valid argument that isn't strong. You can have a strong argument that isn't valid. That gets into all of the philosophical issues of argumentation. But for our practical purposes, we're going to get into it because now I'm going to double your offer. So those of you who have taken me up on the $1 million offer to make a strong case for something that you personally don't believe, you get $1 million if you're able to make a strong case. And the challenge gets better because if you can make a strong argument against something you do personally believe, which is slightly different, right? Maybe you make a strong argument. The people said this, I don't quite really believe it, and I'm going to make a strong argument. What about something that you really strongly believe? Could you make a strong argument against it for an additional $1 million? Oh, I love it. Bethany says, do we get cash? Do we get to cash in on the rubber chickens? Okay, we're going to cash it. Let's figure out how we can cash in on the rubber chickens. That's a good question. Or they're just silly? I kind of think they're fun, but let's figure out a way. If you come up with a good way to cash in on rubber chickens, I'm all ears. All right. Both scenarios should be defending with logical reasons to persuade each other. Yes. And also, I think Hussein, has hit on something really interesting, throwing in persuasion into the mix. So even if we argue and talk facts, some people don't understand what they don't like. All right. That's true. But like and dislike, maybe we'll keep that separate from argumentation. So I think that's a good point. All right, we're going to get into it. Why do you have to know how to make your opponent's argument? Like, if someone argued with you and you disagree, could you make their argument better? Like, okay, I'm going to take your premise, or I'm going to take your claim, and I'm going to bolster it with better evidence because I don't agree with it, but I don't think the evidence you are providing is RRV. How many of you know RRV? RRV is from our Developing a Critical Thinking Mindset course: reliability, relevance, and validity. So you think about RRV in the context of this: am I providing reliable evidence? Am I providing relevant evidence? And is this valid? All right. John Stuart Mill, English philosopher and political economist, explained why to be a good arguer, you must have to make both sides of the argument. And here's what he said in his classic political treatise called On Liberty. And the first sentence you may or may not have heard, but it's the second part that I also think is really, really interesting. So John Stuart Mill says, he who knows only his side of the case knows little of that. I usually say, I'm inspired by that to say, she who knows only her side of the case knows little of that. So that's the first part. But the second part goes on. His reasons may be good. If he only knows his side of the case, his reasons may be good. And no one has ever been able to refute them. But if he is equally unable to refute the reasons on the opposite side, if he does not so much as know what they are, he has no ground for preferring either opinion. So John Stuart Mill says, if you can make your argument, great. But if you can't make your opponent's argument, then you don't know enough about the topic to hold that claim with in your strong, tight hands. All right. So do you know a good argument when you hear it? Well, okay. Do you know when you hear a good argument, do you know it when you hear it? Do you say, that's a good argument because I was persuaded? Or that's a good argument because it was bolstered by reliable, relevant evidence? Do you know the difference between a good argument and a persuasive argument? How many of you know the difference, and you could see it between a good argument and persuasive argument? And to do it, you really have to get into this kind of mindset. You can't just go into an argument, just normally, because then we just get right into our persuasive mode. But can you evaluate a good argument separate from a persuasive argument? All right. So please suggest a book. Suggest a book for effective arguments. I will. I've got a couple. I think one thing you might have fun doing, if you guys are LinkedIn Learning people, we do have, this is what's covered in this Critical Thinking for More Effective Communication, again, coming out this week on LinkedIn Learning. But there are some books, and I've got a couple. So I will put those in the chat later. All right. And I believe the numbers and facts generally help prove the point. Yeah. And how do you know the difference between a fact and truth? How do you know the difference? We address that in the course as well. All right. I don't want to get into all that stuff because we've got so much to do to talk about how you can identify a good argument separate from a persuasive argument. The challenge I see is, let's see, where did that go? The challenge I see is the inability to argue objectively. Most times emotions get in the way of making a logical argument. Absolutely. And the difference between a logical and an emotional argument, both of which have a valid place, but you need to know when you're slipping from one to the next. Another challenge I see is inadequate information to back up a claim. Excellent. Me too. And it's hard because how do you know if the source is valid? There's so much. Do you guys think, do you all think, do you folks think, whatever you want to consider yourself, do you people think, good thinkers think that social media can be a platform for a good argument? Do you think? So far, I haven't seen it. But I wonder if there were, there was a criteria set out, if we could actually have good arguments on social media. So far, I haven't seen it. You want to see the opposite? Twitter. Anyway. All right. So let's see who else we can bring in before we get into, how about if someone takes an argument personally? We're going to get into that as well. That course dives right into that. How to have tough conversations with people you disagree with, has arguments. Let's see here. We have got, what do we have? I'm just getting all screwed up here with the comments. All right. So Michael says, it requires good preparation and some excellent listening skills to be able to know the difference. Yes. And we're going to give you some hints as to how to know the difference between a good argument and a persuasive argument. Persuasive argument gets to your emotional side, while a good argument is one that can hold in a court of law or logical analysis. Actually, that's a really good point, Haroon. I will say that I don't think a court of law is necessarily just a realm of logic. What is that famous quote? A good lawyer knows the law. A great lawyer knows the judge. So I think that there's a little bit of noise in judicial systems, and we're working on some look out in 2022 for more lessons on that. All right. So now we're going to get into, when it comes to making good arguments, I'm going to give 7 or 8 kinds of things to be on the lookout for. All right. So let me know what you think, and we'll get started. I'm going to look at here's a good question, how not to turn an argument into an aggression or fight. And we get straight into that in this new course. So I'm excited. I'm kind of excited that you're asking these questions, because these are the questions I had in mind attempting to answer in this Critical Thinking for More Effective Communication course. You can't base a good argument on social media, rumors, etc., because it's in print, and just because it's in print doesn't mean it's true. Yes, Lee, totally. As a matter of fact, Socrates didn't even believe that you should write things down. So there's some interesting things with that as well. He thought that you should be dialoguing, because once you write things down, it becomes kind of messy. So it's a whole interesting thing about social media. But let's get to the things to remember. Good arguments are not built with funny comebacks or louder voices. So clever little things where you little jab at someone where you hear some argument and you say, well, you're just a this. Classic ad hominem. You can't say that. You can't make that argument because you are in this identity group. That's a classic ad hominem argument. It's a classic logical fallacy. Now, you might want to make it, but you cannot claim that that is a building block for a strong argument in the classic sense of argumentation. So strong arguments are built with claims that are supported by reasons that are glued together by reliable, relevant, and valid evidence. So humiliating, embarrassing, or aggravating your opponent might make you feel good at the time, but these strategies don't form the building blocks of good arguments. And when you see them, it becomes very difficult because you might get shut down. But you can just know that that is not really the foundation of a good argument. So the claims and supporting claims have to be arguable. Well, yeah, that seems obvious. Not so obvious. If I say, most people I talk to think that you should never make personal posts on LinkedIn. Now, is that whether you agree or disagree, okay? When I say most people I talk to think that you should never make personal posts on LinkedIn, and you say, well, I disagree, I haven't presented you with a statement that's arguable. What do you mean you disagree? You disagree that most people I talk to, or you disagree you should never make personal posts on LinkedIn? Now, you might disagree that you should never make personal posts on LinkedIn, but you can't argue with the fact I've presented you with a really weak argument because most people I talk to, that's not the foundation of a good building block for a strong argument. So I've left you with, it's not arguable. So if this is not arguable, then I'm not starting with the foundations of a good argument. Now I could say, what about this? LinkedIn is best when it's used for work-related content only. Now, that's an opinion. You could argue an opinion, but personal opinions aren't sturdy building blocks for a good argument. A good argument requires using good evidence to support the reasons. But at least if I said that, it's arguable. Like you could say, well, I don't think so. You could argue it by providing evidence. So there's a difference between the first thing, which was not arguable. Most people I know don't think that this should be the case. And I don't think this should be the case. I'm getting a little bit better when I put that personal opinion in because at least it's arguable, but personal opinions don't provide the best building block for a good arguments. All right. So those are some starts. Again, if you check out the critical thinking, developing a critical thinking mindset, you can start to see the building blocks that are necessary for our RV, reliable, relevant, and valid evidence. All right, let's get some comments in. The wall of the house is the fact, and the paint over the walls is the truth. Again, we address the difference between fact and truth in the course, and it's tricky. I mean, it seems so obvious, but then when you delve into it, it's really, really hard. So I like that. The facts and the paint on the wall is the truth. That's rubber chickenable. That's a really good, interesting comment. All right, let's see what we've got here. We have got how far knowledge and argument subject is important. Oh, okay. That's a good question too, because you can have the illusion of knowledge. Have we done that in good thinking yet? You can get stuck with this illusion of knowledge. Now, I'm going to answer that question in one of these points, because I think that there's a really good point that will help you know if you're engaging in either starting or participating in a good argument. All right. So it's tempting to use our own experience as good evidence because that's our experience. Like when I said, most people I talk to don't think LinkedIn should be used for personal posts. Okay. I mean, I made that up. That's not true, but let's say I said that. Well, it's tempting to use what I see. I'm a woman. As a woman, I've experienced this, and it's attempting to mean that dismisses anyone who's not a woman from making the argument. But here's the key, and you got to remember this. This is one of my favorite good thinking kind of lessons that I have to remind myself all the time because human. More anecdotal evidence does not equal reliable data. That's not how it works. I go out and see things I want to see. It proves what I want to prove or what I believe. Confirmation bias. All those anecdotal experiences and evidence does not equal reliable data. Now, you can use your personal identity as evidence, but you should be aware that it's only one piece of evidence and it's not as strong as other forms of evidence. All right. Number 5, avoid logical fallacies. You can look out for these fallacies being used on you as well. It's sometimes easier to start by seeing other people use these logical fallacies. Like I mentioned, the ad hominem fallacy, where you criticize the person instead of the argument, or you criticize the person instead of the idea, even though one of the things we should think about is that no person is beneath dignity, but no idea should be above scrutiny. So we should be able to scrutinize any idea, but dignify the person to whom the idea clings. And that's one of the things that I like to try to remember when trying to avoid logical fallacies. There are a lot of logical fallacies, again, in the new course coming out this week, Critical Thinking for More Effective Communication. But that's one of them, the ad hominem. I am of the opinion that peer-reviewed facts are good for an argument. Absolutely. The more people that scrutinize information in a reliably relevant, valid way, the better. Absolutely. And the truth is something that is accepted as fact, just like something with labeled as a fact. But a fact is a logic. Okay. Now, I don't disagree. These are all great points that add to differentiating what makes a strong argument versus a persuasive argument versus a weak argument versus a valid argument. Here is another thing. Evidence from someone, and this is super important. I think someone mentioned something like this. One of you good thinkers said something. If it was you, let me know. And again, I'm going to get to the comments that I haven't gotten to later. But evidence from someone who is an authority is generally stronger than evidence from someone who has authority. So if someone says to you, well, as your boss, blah, 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 that might be a sign that this is someone who has authority, but doesn't necessarily prove that they are an authority. So as your boss, I think that quantum theory can da-da-da-da-da, but that boss has no experience in quantum theory or quantum anything. That might mean that this person has authority, but is not an authority. And that is a very interesting distinction to make. And it can be tricky because if you're arguing with someone who has power over you, like your boss, you might have to figure out some elegant ways to navigate from arguing from authority, which is a kind of a fallacy, to arguing about actual facts and evidence. All right. Next one. Evaluate persuasion separately. And we hinted at this at the beginning. How do you evaluate persuasion effectively? I mean, you're in the process of getting persuaded and now you're winning this argument, you're persuading. But are you making a good argument, or are you making a persuasive argument, or are you making a good argument persuasively? 3 different things. You can have a persuasive argument that is not good. Persuasion is its own art and science, and it can be considered apart from logic and emotion. Not that it's not related to logic and emotion, it is, but it can be a separate set of principles. And if you want to get more onto the persuasive arts, you can check out Brian Ahern's LinkedIn learning course, Persuasive Selling. And you think, well, I don't sell. Well, anytime you're trying to make a persuasive argument, you are selling your idea. So yes, you are in that particular case. So we spend a lot of time trying to persuade others. We think that if we show them the facts, that they will logically come to the same conclusion that we did. And that's just not how it works. When was the last time that someone changed your mind? When was the last time? If you can't think of a time where you thought something and someone changed your mind, you go, yeah, it's probably, I don't know exactly what it is, but I'm not going to think about that. So here's one thing to think about today. When was the last time someone changed your mind? And is it true that those convinced against their will are of the same opinion still? All right. Those are some questions. Let me bring some more comments in. Let's see what we have. What differentiates a good argument from a bad argument is the ability to explore the case study from different angles through receiving multiple points of view in addition to yours. Bad arguments usually include somehow a straw man fallacy. Absolutely. Bad arguments often do include logical fallacies, whether it's the straw man or the weak straw or the post hoc ergo propter hoc or the ad hominem. There's a lot of fallacies, straw man being a very common one. But good arguments actually have very specific components that don't necessarily mean that you're getting opinions from all diverse populations. Not that that's a bad thing. It can be a very good thing. It can be a noisy thing, but a good argument is really built on a foundation of strong evidence. I mean, that's really what it comes down to: reliable, relevant evidence that leads to a strong and valid conclusion. All right. Next, let's see, one more comment we'll do. Bethany says, arguing with authoritative figures is most difficult, especially if they don't really want to hear your opinion. But sometimes it's hard to tell if making this assumption based on fear that you are not valued. Brilliant, brilliant point. Because sometimes you can ask for permission, you know? And if you have and create a culture of curiosity and critical thinking, if you work at the front end to create this culture of curiosity and critical thinking, then you can have systems in place within your organization to say, hey, are you interested in arguing about this? Like in a fun way, like you want to, hey, you want to draw a line in the sand and step over this? No. But creating an opportunity to argue with the mutual understanding and trust that you are both trying to get closer to the truth. You're both trying to understand. The goal isn't to persuade initially. You can persuade later, but you set out with a goal. And that has to be part of your culture. If you're working in a company or your family, you have to establish that culture ahead of time. Otherwise, in the heat of the moment, it's just going to seem like, ugh. Okay, so we're going to wrap it up really quickly, but the goal of an argument is different than the goal of persuasion and the goal of negotiation. So I'm going to end on this, so you know when you're in an argument and with that goal, when you're in an argument to persuade, and when you're in an argument for negotiation. All right. Does anyone want to take a stab at it? Anyone want to take a stab at it? Okay, so Lee says, let's see what Lee says about bias, because we're working on something with that for next year. Everyone has a built-in bias, whether subconscious or not. Anything written or spoken needs to be verified through other and opposing sources before being accepted into your value system. Great advice. Great advice. And and toward that, strong opinions loosely held. So truth is your belief, but not necessarily the facts. See the vaccine denier today. Yes, good point. Good point. Yeah, we could do a whole thing on how to evaluate a good argument around different topics like vaccines, etc. But the goal of an argument should be to get closer to the truth. What about the goal of persuasion? Is that the same or different than the goal of negotiation? Well, the goal of negotiation is to convince someone of something. Okay, so one is to get closer to the truth. One is to convince someone of something. But the goal of negotiation is really different because that's to resolve conflicting goals or interests. So these are all different goals. So it's important when you go into an argument to know what your goal is so you don't slip into one or the other, especially if you're going into a negotiation and you want to resolve these conflicts or conflicting goals or interests. First, you got to know what your goals are. So if you just go in to persuade, but you're not even curious about, that's why you have to start with a negotiation. You start with curiosity. Negotiators might persuade through framing eventually or something like that. But with negotiation, you will definitely be using good arguments and persuasive principles. But the goals are different with a good argument, persuasive argument, and a negotiation. So when communicating from a critical thinking perspective, an argument is not a threat. It's an opportunity to learn. Sometimes we don't want to argue, so you don't have to show up to every argument you're invited to. But when you want to truly understand, to advance closer to the truth, knowing how to engage in good arguments will light your path. All right? So I hope that gives you a little perspective. I think separating some of these concepts out, and then I'm really excited to hear, especially from good thinkers who kind of we're all grappling with how to think issues, which is difficult and luxurious. So thank you for being here every Monday, 9 a.m. Pacific time in the West Coast of the United States, 4 p.m. Greenwich Mean Time on LinkedIn Live. Yay, LinkedIn Live. And on YouTube Live at Becky Saltzman if you want to subscribe and hit that bell to get notifications. So we're streaming simultaneously. But thank you for being good thinkers. And I'm going to try to get to all of your comments and definitely engage with each other, because we're trying to create a community of good thinkers, people who want just a little bit of time set aside from all the time we're focused on what to think, so we can luxuriate for just 30 minutes, or in this case, almost 35 minutes, in improving how we think. So have a great week.